you'll get extra credit. So of course she raises her hand. She says, well, what are you raising your hand for? She said, well, I know one today. She said, you know a Langston Hughes poem today?
Uh-huh.
And so she said, yes. She said, okay, well, you hold on to that until Monday. And I said, well, which one are you going to say? Which one are you going to say?
But you knew more than one.
Yeah, she knew more than one.
Wow.
And so she said, the Negro speaks of rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, you have to give the history of that, because that is Langston Hughes' signature piece.
Mm-hmm.
He is buried up in New York at the Schomburg Library, and inscripted on his grave is that poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And so if you say the poem, you have to give the history of the poem so that they can understand the poem in its totality. And so, you know, those poems stay with them. Those poems stick with them, and they're able to share those kinds of experiences with others along the way as they grow and mature, you know.
Well, that was a part of growing up in our school. You had to learn certain, you know, well, of course, at Easter, you always had to know your piece, and you didn't mess up.
Well, we did a lot of memorizing.
Yeah, I know.
The Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember we used to have our Speak for Democracy contest. And I always would get into that one. And one time I won. I don't remember when I won. But after years later, I look back on that and I think about, what did I say about I Speak for Democracy? Because I wasn't a part of.
Right, you were really, that's my question. It's like,
Right.
they're having you speak about
Yes,
democracy, but you're really a
exactly.
second-class citizen.
Exactly. And I think about that. It's been so long. I was in elementary school at this time. And I was just thinking about that not too long ago, and I was thinking, what did I say? You know, when you're young, you don't think about that.
That's true.
But now I think about, what did I have to say about speaking for democracy? Because I could participate in a democratic society,
Right.
you know.
Well, let's go back, because we don't have much tape left. Let's talk about the history and democracy. What do you think the civil rights movement meant collectively and personally to you? Does that make sense? What do you think it meant?
It meant
The
everything.
movement
Personal.
itself,
It meant everything.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
freedom.
freedom.
Yeah,
Yes.
everything.
Freedom.
Yes,
Freedom.
not total, you know, we didn't get all these rights immediately. There were things that we still could not do, but it was the beginning in our day. It was
What
the
kind of
beginning.
freedom?
Well, freedom to go to a restaurant and sit down and have a lunch, go to a theater and sit where you want, go to the school nearest you, regardless of, you know, who's there, whose community it's in.
How about libraries? Could you?
Also, housing. When we first came to this area, my husband was a teacher, I was a teacher. We were trying to buy a house. One afternoon, my husband goes down to Occoquan. You know, it was a work day, so he went down to Occoquan to inquire about buying a house there. Someone had told him that there was a, and when he showed up, the salesman said to him, Mr. Gholson, you know, I know you're a teacher in the county, blah, 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 but if I sold you this house, I would lose my job. And this was in 1966. And then Dale City started to build, you know, and even then we got no's in the beginning, but we just kept moving ahead and fighting this rule and going to this, and finally they said, okay, you can buy a house there.
So what
So
year was that when you bought
This
the
was
house?
when we bought the first house. We moved in November of 1966. Yes.
Yeah, we came in 1971.
I think it's
It also meant
So-
freedom of when you travel. We used to have to carry food with us.
Yeah.
When we go to New
Talk about
Jersey
that,
to
yeah.
see my dad's
Right.
people, we packed lunches because we couldn't
you couldn't stop.
Stop.
couldn't stop.
Right.
You couldn't stop, you know. And if you had to stop certain places for the restroom and go in the back, it also meant being able to stay in a hotel, because where you went, you could not stay in a hotel. You had to be able to make that trip or sleep in your car or know someone on the way or something of that nature.
One of the ironic things to me was the way our servicemen were treated when they came back. My brother, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. You know, he went to Japan, fighting for our country.
In World War II?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, no, yes. He was in the Korean War.
Okay.
But he was talking about, you know, how they were treated then. And they came back. He didn't go into battle in Japan. He was just stationed there.
Okay.
So I know what you meant. And he said they stopped over in Baltimore, I believe. And, you know, he's with his buddies, black, white, because at that time, you know. And so you can't buy a sandwich here. You're going to have to go around the back. Now, he's uniform. I said, did you have a uniform? He said, yes. I was in full dress with the other white soldiers. He said, Glo, he calls me Glo. He said, Glo, I kid you not. I went around the back. There was this plank on this muddy water area and a little window. And what you want? He said, well, you know, I'll have a cup of coffee or something. He said, Glo, I kid you not, that coffee was as cold as ice water. And he was fighting for his country. That's one of the things I could never understand.
I think you duplicate, you as you get older, you start to realize that there are these role models that maybe who weren't educated. It creates a work ethic, you know, because I often say to people, you can do a lot of things better than me, but you can't outwork me. And I thought, where did that come from? And it comes from watching your parents work. It came from, I wrote this memoir called Skin These Chinaberry Trees and Miss Louise. Miss Louise was a lady on the other side, but Miss Louise could really pick cotton. And so I plotted myself right next to Miss Louise because there's a systematic way of doing this thing, you know. In fact, I was watching the slavery, 13 years of slavery. I'm not sure they were picking cotton correctly. My husband said, now are you going to be the... because you had to be low to the ground. You had to be low to the ground and you had to drag that. And when you reach, you had to reach out and pull everything. So, and the laundry, did you guys use the phrase cat faces? Did you hear that? Well, we would take and iron it, and everything had to be done at a professional level.
Mother used to say, get the cat faces out of this shirt.
You cannot have a cat face.
Sprinkle it.
Yeah, and you sprinkle with the Argo starch. Argo, they
be stiff as a board.
They stand up.
And the iron from the stove, not an electric iron.
No, the smoothing iron. They were called smoothing iron. So you really began to appreciate that, and then you began to appreciate the people who reached back. And I think that what you see here, as I've been sitting and listening, all of us in some way have tried to give something back. Because there was always somebody.
Always.
Third grade for me was Mrs. Bennett, because I did learn a speech, I am the spirit of dawn. Sixth grade, it was Miss Jackson, who went to my father's car for that quarter to go down to that little store and buy peanuts and Pepsi. Yeah, right, peanuts and Pepsi. And she said, I think Lily's smart, and I thought, ooh, I've never heard that before. And, you know, so when I say to the kids at Vaughan, you are smart, don't tell me you are bright, and I would just tell them that all the time until they believed it. And I realized that I didn't create this stuff myself. I got this from people who brought me.
They poured it into you.
And that.
And they kind of were preparing you because they were hoping and praying that what they went through, they wanted life to be better for you.
They did.
And they used to tell us in school, you know, you have to be ready to when you go out into the world. And as we were telling you earlier, you always have to be better or whatever. So when the time comes, you'll be prepared. And teachers and everybody taught you that. So that helped. I think it helped us. Our parents didn't experience it, but it helped us to be able to go out into an integrated society. A lot of people had a hard time adjusting to that because they didn't know how to act. They didn't know how they want to be treated. But because of our background and us, I guess, being educated, we came out self-assured and confident, and no matter what.
Absolutely.
And, you know, getting back to the question of freedom, we're still not there 100%. No matter what we think or how we see things, all you have to do is read the newspaper today, watch the news today. We're still not there. So it's a continuous struggle.
Yes, it
It's
is.
income. Its income equates to a kind of a segregated situation. And in Prince William, I think people don't just run from people of color or whatever, but when you look at the eastern end, when I first came, Dale City was it. That was the middle class. Then it became Lake Ridge. Lake Ridge became the middle class. And then I think Montclair followed that. And then the community, Brittany followed that. And then it started to move west.
Right.
And I hadn't been out there in a long time, now that I'm on the board.
Okay, Mark.
And it's very difficult. We're doing the whole boundary things, and that's been in the newspaper, trying to equalize the schools. But the situation is that if you're on the west, most of the people on the west are not of color. So so do we bus the kids, the African American kids who live on the east to the west, so that they can integrate, or do we bus the middle class kids on the west to the east? And so it's still there, and trying to overcome it is interesting. We were the first.
Economics.
I was like the first two people to have a principal and assistant principal that were black. I got that great opportunity. And when they said, well, you're going to be the first, and I started to think, well, what is this all about? There's no problem with a white principal having a white principal.
That's right.
But two blacks, like you have to mirror the community, and that was the term they used, mirror the community. So I had to write everything on a board, the process, all the folders, and they had to go to Central before they put Rachel English in my school, because we were the first black, two blacks working together alone in a school. In the high school, they may have had some people, but
Yeah, well, we always say, and we still say this today, is if when you go out looking for a job or anything where there's maybe 2 or 3 blacks and they're not going to hire you because there's too many blacks. You know, you never say they're not going to hire you because there's too many whites or too many Hispanics or whatever. It's too many blacks. You know, they just want it's still kind of like we just want
Quote.
yeah.
and if you talk about it, the new thing to me is, you're called pulling the race card.
Yeah, they do
And I
that.
find it very interesting that with women, you can talk about women inequality without somebody saying you pull in the gender card. But when you start talking about who you are, and you can't change who you are and where you came from.